Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's, this comforting expectation of precision.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you break your arm, the X-ray displays that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the film.
Right. There is no debate. It's just a visible, undeniable fact. Broken or not broken.
Exactly. We love that kind of clarity because, well, it means we know exactly how to fix it. But when you step out of the physical realm and into the landscape of human perception, of deep-seated internal beliefs and worldviews, that X-ray machine just completely shatters.
It really does.
We are suddenly navigating a diagnostic space that is profoundly murky.
I mean, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah.
When the ailment we're attempting to identify isn't a physical fracture, but, an entirely conceptual one.
Right, a flaw in how someone perceives reality itself.
Exactly. The usual tools of diagnosis are just totally useless. You can't, take a blood test for cognitive dissonance.
Right.
You can't X-ray an ideological blind spot. It just doesn't work that way.
Which is exactly the territory we're exploring today. So welcome to today's deep dive. If you're joining us right now, I already know a bit about you. You're a learner.
Yeah.
You're someone who actively seeks out fresh perspectives, who, doesn't mind having your assumptions challenged. And you're probably always looking for new ways to decode ancient ideas.
And today's source material is going to demand a lot of intellectual elasticity from you.
Oh, for sure. It's intense.
Yep.
We are analyzing a highly detailed, intensely metaphorical transcript of a theological lecture.
Yeah, it takes incredibly physical, literal biblical concepts.
Things like lamps, architecture, blindness, deafness, muteness.
Right, and completely re-engineers them into psychological and spiritual conditions. It's a masterful rhetorical exercise.
It really is.
The speaker in this transcript is essentially performing open-heart surgery on the worldview of their audience.
That's a great way to put it.
They're utilizing these ancient familiar texts to systematically dismantle preconceived notions of what it actually means to, see or hear the truth.
But before we jump into the deep end, I want to establish our baseline.
Good idea.
Our mission in this deep dive is completely impartial. We're not here to endorse or promote or validate the specific theology or religious doctrines presented in this source text.
Right, that is not what we do here.
Our goal is strictly analytical. We are fascinated by the literary framework. We want to understand the rhetorical arguments the speaker uses to provoke this audience.
Because it is provocative.
Highly provocative. We want to decode how this text transforms physical ailments into profound metaphors and, most crucially, what those metaphors reveal about how you and I consume, process, and, well, occasionally reject information in our own modern lives.
Yeah, we're dissecting the architecture of the argument itself. Because the psychological mechanisms the speaker describes, the sheer arrogance of assumed knowledge, the paralyzing fear of changing your worldview.
The tragedy of clinging to outdated paradigms, yeah.
Exactly. Those aren't exclusively religious phenomena. They're universally human.
Completely universal.
Whether you are a devout believer or a strict secularist, the cognitive traps described in this text apply directly to how we navigate our daily reality.
Okay, let's unpack this. The text doesn't start with abstract philosophy. It starts with dirt, canvas, and physical space.
Very grounded.
It begins by laying down a foundational metaphor rooted in ancient architecture, specifically the layout of Moses' tabernacle in the Old Testament.
Right. The speaker transports the audience back thousands of years to the ancient Israelites wandering in the desert. And to understand the psychological weight of this, you really have to imagine the environment.
Right, it's harsh.
Extremely. It's a harsh, chaotic, unforgiving wilderness. And in the center of this chaos, they construct a highly specific, rigidly organized physical structure, the tabernacle.
And the text describes its progression in detail, right?
It does. First, you have an outer courtyard. Then you enter the first tent, which is known as the holy place. Beyond that, separated by a thick veil, is the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies. And inside that deepest, most restricted space sits the Ark of the Covenant, topped by the mercy seat.
And within this tradition, that specific piece of furniture is where the literal, concentrated presence of the divine resides.
Yes. The text refers to it as the place where the Word is God, where ultimate truth sits.
So it's basically a geographical location for truth.
Exactly.
But here's the critical detail the text zeroes in on. To get to that ultimate truth, to approach the mercy seat, you had to pass through that first tent, the holy place.
Right.
And that first tent is completely enclosed. it is entirely dark. Because it's dark, a physical lamp is required just to navigate the space.
And this is the linchpin for the entire lecture. The lamp does not exist for its own glory. It exists purely as a utilitarian response to the darkness of that preliminary space.
Wow. Okay.
The text points to the book of Hebrews, chapter 9, noting that this entire physical layout, the tents, the veils, the lamps, was never meant to be the final reality. It was a figure or a shadow of things to come.
So the speaker is establishing a principle of progression.
Yes. You start with physical shadows to eventually understand spiritual realities. The text then leaps from that ancient desert tent all the way to the apocalyptic visions of the book of Revelation in the New Testament.
That's quite a jump.
It is. In Revelation 4, a door opens in heaven, and the prophet sees lamps blazing before the throne of God. And the speaker poses this really disruptive question to the audience. When the prophets looked into the divine realm and saw lamps, were they looking at literal oil and wicks?
And the text emphatically argues no.
Right. Emphatically no.
It strips away the physical literalism. The argument is that the lamp is actually a metaphor for a human spirit, an eye or a heart.
Exactly. It represents a state of spiritual perception, a capacity to perceive truth.
What's fascinating here is the systematic dismantling of our human reliance on physical structures. We just love to externalize our search for meaning.
We really do. And the text brings up the concept of grand, magnificent religious buildings. It specifically mentions soaring cathedrals like Notre Dame in Paris and the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona.
Oh yeah, beautiful structures.
Breathtaking monuments, literal temples of stone, glass, and light. We build them to house the divine. But the text pivots sharply away from architecture, quoting Jesus in the book of John, where he refers to his own body as a temple.
Right.
And then quoting the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians.
I am familiar with that Corinthians verse. It's a radical statement for its time. Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst?
It completely inverts the religious paradigm. The text argues that the ultimate intention of the divine was never to be housed in a building, and the lamp was never meant to be a physical object you set on a table.
So the human being is meant to be the temple.
Yes, and the human spirit is meant to be the lamp. The internal spiritual architecture completely replaces the external physical architecture.
Which places a staggering amount of responsibility on the individual.
Oh, absolutely.
It shifts the burden of enlightenment from a location you visit on a weekend to your own internal operating system.
It's all on you.
But, as I read through this section, a logical friction point emerged for me regarding the nature of a lamp.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, if the ultimate destination is the divine presence, which the text repeatedly equates to the sun, or the ultimate blinding light of morning, then a lamp is, by its very definition, a temporary intervention.
Oh, that's a really good point.
It makes me think of the nightlight I put in my kid's bedroom.
A nightlight. That is an interesting parallel. Walk me through the mechanics of that analogy.
Well, think about the utility of a nightlight. At 2 in the morning, when the room is pitch black, that little 5-watt bulb plugged into the wall is the most vital piece of technology in the house.
Right. You'd be lost without it.
Exactly. Gives you spatial awareness, keeps you from fracturing your toe on a wooden toy.
Which is very important.
Yeah. Extremely. And it wards off the psychological fear of the dark. In the context of the night, it is absolutely essential. But the utility of that nightlight is entirely conditional upon the darkness.
Right.
The second the earth rotates, the sun comes over the horizon and daylight floods through the window. That nightlight becomes instantly obsolete. It is redundant.
Yeah, you don't even notice it's on.
Right. It would be an act of madness to draw heavy blackout curtains in the middle of a beautiful, sunny afternoon just so you could continue relying on a dim plastic nightlight.
That captures the precise theological and psychological argument the speaker is building.
Really?
Yes. Within the framework of this text, the lamp, whether it's a physical object, a preliminary teaching, or even a human prophet, is vital during the night of ignorance. It guides you. It keeps you safe.
But it's not the end goal.
Exactly. It is fundamentally designed to be outgrown. It is designed to be blown out the moment the true ultimate light arrives.
And this concept of the temporary nightlight serves as the launch pad for what might be the most controversial, abrasive argument in the entire source text.
Yeah, it definitely takes a sharp turn here.
Because the speaker doesn't just leave this as an abstract philosophy. The text assigns the role of the first lamp, the ultimate spiritual nightlight, to a highly revered historical figure.
John the Baptist.
Yes, John the Baptist.
The speaker points directly to the Gospel of John, chapter 5, where Jesus is speaking to a crowd and describes John the Baptist with a very specific phrase. a burning and shining lamp.
When on a surface reading, and throughout much of historical theology, this is interpreted as high praise.
Right. John was the heralded prophet, the voice crying in the wilderness, the one sent to prepare the way. He was the solitary light cutting through a dark era.
But the text does not treat it as praise.
Not all.
It treats it as a job description with an expiration date.
Yeah.
And it becomes highly critical of how John handled that expiration.
It applies that nightlight logic with ruthless, unsentimental consistency.
Ruthless is the word.
If John the Baptist is structurally defined as the lamp, and the figure he is introducing Jesus is defined as the true light, the rising sun, then what is the required action for the lamp when the sun is fully visible?
The lamp has to be extinguished. It has to yield.
Exactly. The text argues that John the Baptist fundamentally failed to blow out his own light.
Wow.
The speaker uses specific historical details from the biblical narrative to construct this critique. First, it highlights the fact that John maintained his own separate faction of disciples.
Oh, that's right. He did.
Even after Jesus began his public ministry, John's followers remained loyal to John. The text argues that if John truly understood the temporary nature of his role as the lamp the moment the sun arrived, he should have systematically dismantled his own operation.
Just completely shut it down.
He should have directed every single one of his disciples to follow the new light. He should have ceased to be a master and enthusiastically embraced the role of a disciple.
The narrative mentions that a few did leave John, right? Like Andrew's a notable example. But that John essentially retained his status as a separate, independent leader.
And then the text zeroes in on a specific moment in Matthew 11.
This is the part that really struck me.
Yeah. John has been arrested by King Herod. He's sitting in a dungeon facing execution, and he sends his own disciples to Jesus with a question. Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?
The speaker in our source text analyzes that question not merely as a lapse in confidence, but as a catastrophic structural failure of perception.
Precisely. The argument is that John, a man whose entire existence was predicated on recognizing and heralding the truth, failed to fully recognize that truth when it stood before him.
Instead of yielding to the new reality, he clung to his old paradigm. He clung to his followers, his authority, his environment.
Yeah.
But here is where I have to pause and challenge the text's perspective. I mean, isn't this analysis lacking basic human empathy?
How do you mean?
Look at the contextual reality of John's situation. The man is locked in a first-century dungeon. He knows Herod wants him dead. He is experiencing profound psychological trauma and physical deprivation. Anyone in that situation is going to experience a crisis of faith.
Oh, sure.
He's likely sitting in the dark thinking, if this new leader is the victorious, world-changing Messiah I promised, why am I rotting in a cell? To condemn him as a spiritual failure for experiencing a moment of human terror feels incredibly cold.
It is undeniably cold from a modern, psychologically empathetic standpoint. We live in an era that really prioritizes validating human emotional experience. But this friction highlights how this specific source text operates. The speaker is not interested in emotional validation.
Obviously not.
Within the rigid structural framework the speaker is constructing, empathy for human weakness is entirely secondary to the strict, uncompromising adherence to truth.
So it's not a moral judgment necessarily.
Right. The text isn't necessarily declaring John an inherently evil person. It's rendering a structural verdict.
Right.
John was the embodiment of the lamp era. When the sun arrived, clinging to the identity of the lamp became an act of resistance against the light. Holding on to an outdated paradigm, even a paradigm that was originally ordained and deeply comfortable, is, according to this text, the very definition of losing your illumination.
It's the ultimate sunk cost fallacy.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
You've invested so much of your identity in being the nightlight that when the sun comes up, you draw the curtains. You choose the artificial light you control over the overwhelming light you cannot control.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The ego attaches itself to the role, and the speaker uses this interpretation of John the Baptist to issue a chilling warning to their own contemporary audience.
Like a warning about modern leaders.
Yes. The text asserts that this is a repeating historical pattern. Just as the first lamp failed to yield and consequently went dark, the lamps of the modern era, the current leaders, experts, and institutions face this exact same test.
When new truth arrives, will they yield or will they cling to their relevance? Which creates a terrifying logical progression. Because if you are the nightlight and you refuse to yield to the sun, your light is eventually removed.
Right.
And when the light is removed, you are plunged into darkness. This moves us from the architecture of enlightenment into a deeply disturbing exploration of the anatomy of spiritual blindness.
And this is where the text gets really intense. The speaker transitions into the book of Revelation, specifically analyzing the letters to the 7 churches in Asia in chapters 1 through 3.
Okay, I know those chapters are filled with imagery of stars, lamps, and divine observation.
Yes, and the text extracts a terrifying spiritual mechanism from these verses. If the lamp, which we've established is the capacity to perceive truth, is removed from an individual or an institution, they instantaneously become spiritually blind.
And here we reach the absolute epicenter of the text's argument.
Yeah, this is it.
The true horror of this specific type of spiritual blindness is not the lack of sight. The horror is that the blind person is entirely unaware that they cannot see.
That's the scariest part. The speaker leans heavily on Revelation chapter 3. Specifically, the message to the church in Laodicea.
Right.
It's one of the most scathing critiques in ancient literature. The text quotes the internal monologue of these people. I am rich, I have acquired wealth, and do not need a thing.
They operating with maximum confidence.
Maximum. They look at their lives, their beliefs, their systems, and they perceive absolute perfection. But the text contrasts this with the external divine perspective, which says, you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked.
The cognitive dissonance is staggering. The text emphasizes this repeatedly. The speaker hammers the point. You are blind, but you do not know it. You are naked, but you are walking around like you are wearing a tailored suit.
What is remarkable about this ancient theological text is how perfectly it maps onto modern behavioral psychology.
Really? In what way?
Well, the speaker is describing a phenomenon that psychologists today call anosognosia.
Anosognosia. Okay.
Yeah, it's a neurological condition where a patient's brain physically cannot perceive its own illness. In a broader cognitive sense, we call it the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Oh, I've heard of that.
It's a cognitive bias where individuals with low ability, expertise, or knowledge regarding a specific task overestimate their ability or knowledge. The less you actually comprehend about the complexity of reality, the more certain you are that you understand everything.
The illusion of competence.
Precisely. The text strips the word blindness of its clinical biological definition. It's no longer about a failure of the optic nerve or a damaged cornea.
So what is it?
Spiritual blindness, in the architecture of this text, is a state of supreme weaponized arrogance. It is the absolute, unquestioning certainty that your current worldview is the final, ultimate truth.
Wow.
Ironically, this fortress of certainty makes it fundamentally impossible for you to recognize actual truth if it were standing right in front of you, which is exactly what the text argues happened to the religious experts of John the Baptist's era.
You know, I want to pull this out of the ancient context for a second,
Yeah.
because the implications for you, the listener, right now, are profound, regardless of your religious affiliation.
I agree completely.
Think about the architecture of our modern information age. We live in bespoke echo chambers. Algorithms are financially incentivized to feed us content that perfectly aligns with our pre-existing beliefs.
Yes, confirmation bias on steroids.
Exactly. Our social circles act as enforcement mechanisms, punishing dissenting thought and rewarding conformity. We wake up every day utterly convinced of our own sight.
We really do.
We are certain we have the correct political alignment, the superior ethical framework, the most accurate read on global events.
Yeah.
How often are we the Laodiceans?
That's a great question.
How often are we walking through the world saying, I'm intellectually rich, my worldview is bulletproof, I see perfectly, while completely missing the vast, complex reality of this situation?
It is an incredibly uncomfortable mirror that the speaker is forcing the audience to look into. The text is demanding that they recognize a terrifying reality. The feeling of absolute certainty is not proof of sight.
Right.
In fact, intense, unquestioning certainty is the primary symptom of this specific strain of blindness. If you never experience doubt, if you never subject your core assumptions to rigorous stress tests, if you never find yourself fundamentally changing your mind upon encountering new evidence, the text suggests your lamp was extinguished a long time ago.
That is a heavy realization.
Yeah.
But the text does not let the audience off the hook there.
No, it keeps going.
It moves systematically down the anatomy. Once it establishes the invisible nature of this blindness, it targets the ears and the mouth. It introduces the concept of spiritual deafness and muteness.
And to illustrate this, the speaker deploys an incredibly grounded, borderline brutal metaphor.
The speaker shifts from abstract theology to a direct audit of the congregation's actual behavior.
Yeah, they issue a blunt challenge regarding the assimilation of knowledge. The text says, if you listen to the teachings for 7 or 8 years and you cannot teach a single class, you are deaf and mute.
Here is where it gets really interesting, because the speaker uses the coffee cup test to explain the mechanics of this failure.
I love this analogy.
It's a brilliant, undeniable analogy. The speaker says, imagine you're holding a coffee cup. I pour hot coffee into that cup. A few minutes later, you tip the cup over. What is supposed to come out?
Coffee.
Coffee.
Okay.
If you tip the cup over, nothing comes out. What does that prove? It proves the coffee was never actually inside the cup to begin with.
It is a devastatingly effective diagnostic tool. In this metaphor, the listener is the cup, and the teaching, or the word, is the coffee.
Okay, so it's about what you actually retain.
Yes, the speaker is attacking the illusion of passive consumption. Sitting in a room, taking notes, and allowing sound waves to hit your eardrums for a decade does not constitute hearing. True hearing, according to this text, fundamentally alters the molecular contents of the vessel. If you cannot tip yourself over meaning, if you cannot clearly articulate, explain, and reproduce the complex concepts you claim to have consumed, then you never actually consume them.
You are functionally spiritually deaf.
Yes, and because you possess nothing to say, you are spiritually mute.
I see this all the time in modern learning cultures. As a learner, you might consume 60 hours of podcasts a month. You might read 50 nonfiction books a year.
Sure.
You highlight passages, you bookmark articles, you build this massive scaffolding of perceived knowledge. But the coffee cup test asks a brutal question.
What's that?
If a friend asks you over dinner to explain the core thesis of that 400-page book you just finished, can you do it? Or do you just mumble something about it being really insightful and vaguely referencing history? If you cannot synthesize and communicate the idea, this text argues it never penetrated your mind.
The illusion of explanatory depth. We mistake the feeling of familiarity with a concept for actual mastery of the concept. If we connect this back to the source text, the speaker goes a step further and diagnoses why the coffee isn't staying in the cup. The text argues that people remain deaf and mute because the cup is already full of debris.
Debris? Like what?
The speaker points to the audience's environment, their worldly attachments, their unchecked emotions, and specifically calls out human impulses, labeling them as a devil that prevents true understanding.
The text actually mocks the excuses people make, doesn't it?
It does. It quotes hypothetical congregation members whining, "Teacher, you don't understand my environment. You don't know my situation. My life is too complicated."
And the speaker has zero tolerance for those excuses.
None. Which ties directly into the text's radical redefinition of repentance. In modern Western culture, we've largely reduced repentance to an emotional transaction.
Right. It means feeling guilty, shedding tears, offering an apology.
But this text strips away the sentimentality. Repentance is defined strictly as an action. It is a fundamental pivot in orientation.
So it's not just feeling bad.
Not at all. The speaker uses a physical analogy. Your hands are completely full of darkness, your old biases, your toxic environment, your emotional crutches. You see the light, the new truth, and you want it. Okay. But you physically cannot grasp the new truth until you intentionally open your hands and drop the darkness.
You cannot hold on to your baggage and grab the lifeline at the same time.
Precisely. Repentance is not feeling sad that you are holding the darkness. Repentance is the physical act of dropping it on the floor.
Wow.
The text argues that the congregation remains deaf and mute because they are attempting an impossible compromise. They want the intellectual and spiritual upgrade of enlightenment, but they refuse to suffer the discomfort of abandoning their old, familiar frameworks.
It requires total intellectual plasticity, which is incredibly difficult.
Oh, extremely.
But this raises a secondary, perhaps even more terrifying problem. It's one thing to run a self-audit, realize you're a blind, deaf coffee cup full of emotional baggage, and decide to change. But what if you look to your mentors for help, and you realize the person pouring the coffee is just as empty as you are?
Oh, that's a scary thought.
What if the experts, the teachers, the leaders you trust are also completely blind, but are highly skilled at faking sight?
That transitions us into one of the most famously sharp confrontational narratives in the New Testament.
Which the speaker in our text leverages to issue a massive systemic warning about leadership.
Yes. We are talking about the narrative in Matthew 15 and the concept of the blind leading the blind.
Right, let's get into that.
The text unpacks this scene meticulously. The Pharisees, who were the undisputed religious elite, the academic experts, and the moral authorities of their society, approach Jesus.
Okay.
They are deeply offended because Jesus' disciples are breaking an established tradition. Specifically, the disciples are eating bread without performing the complex traditional ritual of hand washing.
It's vital to note that this was not a debate about hygiene.
No, not at all.
It was a debate about purity loss. It was about performing the correct external rituals to signal internal righteousness.
Exactly. It was an incredibly complex system of rules that only the highly educated could properly maintain.
Yeah.
Jesus responds by completely invalidating their metric for holiness.
He tells the crowd that it's not what goes into a man's mouth that defiles him, but what comes out of his mouth that reveals his true nature.
He dismisses the external ritual and points entirely to the internal reality of the heart. Now, the aftermath of this confrontation is what the speaker focuses on.
What was next?
The disciples approach Jesus nervously and say, "Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this?"
The disciples are playing politics.
Absolutely.
They recognize that Jesus just publicly humiliated the most powerful cultural influencers of their day. They are terrified of the social and institutional fallout.
And Jesus' response is utterly devoid of political calculation or pastoral softness. He says, "Leave them alone. They are blind guides. If the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit."
And the speaker in our source text seizes upon this interaction to hammer home a crucial distinction for the audience.
There are two types of blind people. A foolish blind person is simply ignorant. They don't know the truth, but they aren't actively trying to command a following.
Okay.
But a blind guide, a leader who lacks actual spiritual sight, but possesses the confidence, the credentials, and the vocabulary of an expert, is the most dangerous entity in the world.
Because human beings are wired to defer to authority.
Exactly. We will trust them, and they will confidently march us right off a cliff.
The speaker is sounding an alarm. Do not outsource your discernment. Just because someone possesses the title of Pharisee or pastor or professor or thought leader does not mean they actually see reality.
The text goes even further, launching an aggressive critique against a modern, highly sentimentalized concept of unconditional love and tolerance.
Really? How so?
The speaker actively mocks the idea that an enlightened person should exercise limitless, accommodating patience for leaders who are stubbornly blind and actively leading others into ditches.
The text poses a rhetorical challenge, right? Is your love really so cheap that you waste it on those who aggressively demand to stay in the dark?
Yes. The speaker actually role-plays an argument with the congregation. They say, "I know you will complain, teacher. You have no love. You lack compassion."
And the speaker's response is essentially, my love is not cheap enough to validate your ignorance.
It is a radical rejection of enabling behavior. The text argues that if an authority figure insists on clutching their darkness, even after the light has been presented, the only spiritually sound response is the one Jesus modeled. Leave them alone.
Withdraw your support.
Stop validating their authority. Let them fall into the pit of their own making.
So what does this actually demand of us? I mean, is the text advocating for an elitist lack of empathy?
It can definitely read that way.
Should we just abandon anyone who doesn't interpret reality exactly the way we do? From a modern perspective, that sounds incredibly arrogant and isolating.
It is a highly isolating philosophy, and that pushback is valid. But rhetorically, the speaker is deploying this harshness not to create arrogant elites, but to force a radical, terrifying sense of personal accountability onto the listener.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Within the logical architecture of this text, you cannot offshore your intellectual or spiritual survival to a proxy. You cannot stand at the bottom of a ditch with broken legs and say, "Well, my expert told me this was a safe path."
If you willingly abdicate your own critical thinking, close your eyes, and grab the coattails of a blind guide, the impact with the ground is entirely your fault.
The text is demanding that you continuously audit the people you follow. You have to ask the hard questions. Do they actually possess a deep, coherent understanding of truth, or are they just loudly repeating traditional, empty rituals that keep the crowds happy?
You have to take ownership of your own optic nerves.
Yes.
You have to be willing to look at the people you admire, the thought leaders who shape your worldview, and ask, are they actually describing a reality, or are they just really articulate about the shadows on the wall?
Which serves as a perfect transition to the final and perhaps most difficult concept in the text. Let's assume you do the grueling work.
Okay.
You pass the coffee cup test. You empty your hands of your emotional baggage. You fire your blind guides. And you manage to force your own eyes open. What is the reward? What happens next?
According to this text, it is not a joyous, celebratory parade.
Not even close.
True sight is profoundly, agonizingly alienating.
It's the paradox of sight. And the text illustrates this by analyzing an incredibly specific narrative in the Gospel of John, chapter 9, the healing of a man born blind.
The speaker walks the audience through the mechanics of the story, right?
Yes. Jesus encounters a man who has been blind since birth. The disciples, operating on the traditional assumptions of their day, ask a diagnostic question. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?
And Jesus rejects the premise entirely.
Entirely. Stating that the blindness exists so the works of God might be displayed, he then performs a visceral, highly unorthodox healing.
The mud and the spit.
Right, he spits into the dirt, makes mud with his saliva, smears the mud on the blind man's eyes, and instructs him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. The man obeys, washes the mud away, and returns with fully functioning sight.
But the speaker in our text glosses over the miracle itself to focus entirely on the theological twist that happens in the aftermath.
Exactly. Later in the chapter, addressing the cultural chaos the healing caused, Jesus makes a statement that redefines his entire mission.
For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind.
This is the crux of the text's final, devastating argument. Jesus did not enter the system simply to provide health care. He came to shatter and invert the established order.
And the speaker in the text paints a vivid, almost surreal picture to help the congregation grasp the societal implications of this.
They ask the audience to imagine that the entire world is a massive blind massage parlor.
I found that imagery so jarring and brilliant. It completely reframes the concept of normalcy.
It is a dark, comedic stroke of genius. The premise is that every single human being in the world is blind. The politicians, the scientists, the religious leaders, the mechanics, the artists, everyone.
They've constructed an entire civilization, complete with laws, commerce, and social norms, based entirely on the assumption that sight does not exist.
Right. And then suddenly, a rogue doctor comes along, washes your eyes, and you can see. What is the result?
You don't become the president.
No.
You don't become a hero. To the blind society, you become an absolute monster. You become a terrifying anomaly.
Because you are suddenly perceiving and reacting to a dimension of reality they don't even have the vocabulary for.
You are trying to explain the concept of a sunset or the color blue to a population that only understands tactile feedback and sound waves.
Exactly. You tell them there is a massive fire approaching from a mile away, but they can't feel the heat yet, so they conclude you're having a psychotic break.
You are a fundamental threat to the stability of their worldview.
If we pull back and look at the broader philosophical landscape, the speaker in this text is tapping into the exact same psychological vein as Plato's allegory of the cave.
Yes. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Let's trace that out, because it perfectly explains the social cost the text is warning about.
In Plato's ancient allegory, you have prisoners chained to the floor of a dark cave since childhood. They are forced to stare at a blank wall. Behind them is a fire, and people walk in front of the fire carrying objects, casting shadows on the wall.
For the prisoners, those two-dimensional shadows are the absolute, total reality of the universe.
Then one prisoner is forcibly freed. He's dragged up a steep, agonizing tunnel and pushed out into the surface world. The sunlight blinds him at first. It's incredibly painful.
But slowly, his eyes adjust.
And he sees three-dimensional reality trees, water, the sun itself. He possesses the ultimate truth. But the tragedy of the allegory is what happens when he goes back down into the cave to free his friends.
They don't throw him a party.
Not at all. When he goes back into the darkness, his eyes can no longer focus on the shadows. He stumbles around.
To the prisoners, his journey to the surface didn't enlighten him. It ruined him.
When he tries to explain the sun to them, they think he's a lunatic. And Plato concludes that if the prisoners could get their hands on him, they would kill him because his new truth is an existential threat to the only reality they understand.
And the speaker in our source text is issuing a desperate warning to the congregation about that exact same social pressure.
Yeah.
The text implies that when you finally gain true spiritual sight, the psychological pressure to pretend to be blind just so you are not ostracized by your family, your friends, and your community is nearly unbearable.
It is so much easier to just close your eyes, assimilate back into the blind massage parlor, and enjoy the comfort of the shadows rather than endure the isolation of standing alone in the light.
The text issues a direct command. Do not become blind again to win them over.
You cannot fake ignorance to preserve relationships. But the text closes by highlighting the ultimate tragic irony of the Pharisees in John 9.
The Pharisees overhear Jesus talking about making the seeing blind.
Insulted, they challenge him, asking, "What, are we blind too?" and Jesus delivers the fatal diagnostic blow. If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains.
It is the ultimate inversion. The Pharisees were the ultimate experts. They possessed all the degrees, all the textual knowledge, all the cultural authority.
They were absolutely, fundamentally certain that they held the truth.
But precisely because they claimed their vision was already perfect, they rendered themselves utterly incapable of receiving new light. Their absolute certainty was the very mechanism of their damnation.
The deep underlying architecture of this entire text points to one inescapable conclusion. True sight requires the continuous humbling admission of your own blindness.
The exact moment you look at the world and declare, I see perfectly, my worldview is complete, I have nothing left to learn, you've permanently locked yourself in the dark.
This has been a massive journey. Let's take a breath and retrace the path this text just forced us down.
Yeah, let's recap. We began with physical architecture, the ancient tabernacle, the dark tent, and the literal oil lamps, and watched the speaker brilliantly transform those elements into the human body, asserting that our spirit, our capacity to perceive, is the ultimate lamp.
We analyzed the tragic case study of the first lamp, John the Baptist, exploring the psychological danger of wrapping our identity in a temporary role and refusing to yield when new truth arrives.
We stared into the horror of spiritual blindness, the Dunning-Kruger nightmare of being profoundly in the dark while aggressively insisting we are standing in the sun.
We ran our own intellects through the coffee cup test, confronting the reality that if we cannot articulate our knowledge, we are functionally deaf and mute, paralyzed by the emotional baggage we refuse to drop.
We tackled the uncomfortable necessity of firing our blind guides, rejecting the cheap love that enables ignorance, and taking uncompromising personal responsibility for our own intellectual and spiritual vision.
And finally, we ended in the lonely, alienating reality of the paradox of sight.
The terrifying realization that opening your eyes in a blind world makes you a monster to the people you love, and the profound necessity of constantly doubting our own vision in order to ever truly see.
It is a dense, provocative, and entirely unsentimental framework for auditing how we interact with reality.
It really is. And it leaves me with one final thought, something I want you, the learner listening to this, to chew on as you go about your day.
Okay, what's that?
This source text spends an enormous amount of time and rhetorical energy warning its audience about external threats. It warns about the blind guides, the false teachers, the societal pressure to conform to the blind massage parlor.
Right, watch out for the bad guys.
It tells you to watch out for the Pharisees out there in the world trying to drag you into a pit. But analyzing the deep psychology behind these metaphors, it makes me wonder about a much more insidious threat.
Which is?
What if the most dangerous Pharisee isn't out there in the world? What if the most dangerous, deceptive Pharisee is the one living inside our own heads?
The internal voice that constantly reassures us that we are already rich, already enlightened, and need nothing.
Exactly. The voice that tells us our algorithm is reality. The voice that whispers that we have read enough books, that our political framework is flawless, that our assumptions are bulletproof, and that we no longer need to do the exhausting work of changing our minds.
That inner voice that arrogantly claims it can see perfectly.
How do you plan to check your own intellectual eyesight today? How do you ensure that you aren't just stubbornly drawing the curtains against the sun, terrified to admit that you've been relying on a plastic nightlight? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep dropping your baggage, and whatever you do, keep your eyes wide open.